Well, as promised, we are on the 40th anniversary of one of the most wild professional fights ever, wildest first round ever. I don't think there's an argument, and a KO by Marvin Hagler that still resonates 40 years later over Tommy Hitman Hearns. It is the Fight Freaks Unite podcast, a special edition. I am merely the somewhat competent host, TJ Reeves. Hello, Dan Rayfield, on this special occasion, and we have got
No, it's good.
do we have a show coming up? How are you?
I'm doing good. I can't wait for the people to hear this
Yeah,
or
so
see this if they're watching on YouTube.
yes, both. Full disclosure, we are typically here going into the weekend with a preview coming off on the recap show twice every weekend, but here this is special occasion midweek here in April of 2025 on the 40th anniversary. Thank you for finding us. Make sure you rate us and review us. You're going to rate and review this pod, I guarantee you, because coming up in a few moments, he was on the closed circuit call, the pay-per-view, if you will, in that time call. Al Bernstein, the legendary Hall of Fame analyst, right here on this pod to talk Hagler Hearns 40 years later. And then later, there was a second call of the fight in the United States. There were actually three calls. There was another call in Britain as well. But the guy that called it on HBO with Ray Leonard and Larry Merchant is Barry Tomkins. Dan Rayfield, Barry Tomkins also with us to reminisce. It's a twofer
How often is
here
that?
on the pod feed. So before we get into our guests, give me the little quick, you know what's coming because we've already talked to these guys, but give me a little bit about being nostalgic 40 years later on how big a deal this fight was. Hagler Hearns, go.
Huge fight, obviously. Middleweight championship of the world. To set the scene, we talk about it with the guys a little bit. Ray Leonard is in retirement doing the fights for HBO. And these guys kind of found each other because there was no rematch for Tommy Hearns with Ray at that point. Hagler had been unsuccessful in getting Ray into the ring. And so how do we make it the biggest fight we can? We fight each other. And it was a huge mega event. It turned out to be one of the great fights in the history of boxing, probably the greatest first round in the history of boxing, period. And the thing that I'm so excited for the people to hear about is because we've already done the interviews with these guys. We're just taping this after the fact. I have, as said many times on the show when we've discussed these fights, that I have spent most of my life obsessing with these matches, the 9 fights that took place between Marvin Hagler, Sugar Ray Leonard, Tommy Hearns, and Roberto Duran. So for there to be new things for me to learn, and I say that as somebody that has obviously watched the fights a million times, I know a lot of the people that were involved with the fights and have spoken to them about it, not necessarily in interviews, just people I know, other writers, the promoter, Bob Arum, the broadcasters. I have spoken to Al Bernstein and Barry just on my own private, conversation with them about that fight and others. So to hear them come on with us and me hear from both of them things that I had never heard before. I've read the books. George Kimball, one of my longtime friends before he passed years ago, who covered boxing for the Boston Herald for many, many years, who covered all 9 fights, to me wrote the definitive book about the Four King rivalry. I watched the great Showtime documentary. I watched the legendary Nights episodes that go behind the scenes. When I heard some of the things that Al, and specifically what Barry said, there's a thing that Barry's going to talk about what made Ray finally decide that it was time for Marvin Hagler. And it wasn't just about the fact that he had a rough night and won in a highly physical fight against John Mugabe. But this blew my mind. I'm losing it right now thinking about it, that I didn't know about this till Barry Tompkins just said it on this show.
That's a tease for what Barry Tompkins says about that here in a little bit.
I had to stop him and I had to re-ask, are you saying XYZ? And he's like, yeah, oh my God.
Just wait on the tease about when Leonard believed, or at least was being told by whom, that he could do it, that he could beat Marvin Hagler. Stand by for that. Again, to go back to this time frame, we just need to illuminate this before we hear from Al and hear from Barry, that this is closed circuit. This is early in the, if I'm not mistaken, it was a Monday night, right? April the 15th, because they always would have these off the weekend because they could show it in movie theaters. Movies never really were shown or did a lot of business on Monday night or Tuesday night. So movie theaters, ballrooms, different locations, Monday night, Tuesday night, they love to have the big time fights. And that was the case for this one with all the buildup. And it's an interesting time. No internet, Big Dan, as you know. No radio call of this fight. So you were awaiting to see what happened. In my case, I'm a teenager like you. We are the same age. I'm listening for the radio. I'm watching the ESPN Sports Center when they came on and said what a violent first round Wait until you see it at a later date if you haven't seen it. And the radio is saying Marvin Hagler has knocked out Thomas Hearns in the third round in what may be one of the wildest fights we've seen in recent memory. And so at that point, I couldn't wait to watch the tape delay on HBO, which was later that week with Barry, Tomkins, Sugar Ray Leonard, and Larry Merchant. So there's my recollection of being a teenager in and around that. And I give a quick recollection before we get to the guests.
My recollection is reading about it in the papers leading up to the fight. I remember reading about it in Sports Illustrated, which had done preview stories about it, but not getting a chance to see the fight live because obviously it wasn't on HBO, which we had in our house, but I could only watch on special occasions because it wasn't for kids at that point. And so not knowing the result until actually I don't think I remember watching it on SportsCenter. I remember waking up and we got the newspaper delivered to our house, and I guess it must have ended in time because I remember being in the newspaper and me looking at the paper and then watching the replay, several days later, but really sinking my teeth into the fight when the Sports Illustrated came, that had it on the cover that gave the extent, gave their review, if you will, their story about the fight, which was always a great read. And I still have that issue, believe it or not. You believe it, in my collection of boxing stuff. But yeah, that's how I found out about it. I didn't know the result until the next morning because I guess for it was probably a school night, wasn't staying up late.
That's right.
But was excited to see what the result was. And the other thing I remember is going to school the next day. And, I wasn't like a diehard boxing fan at that point, but I still, if it's a big fight, you still kind of knew about it, even if it wasn't heavyweights. But I remember the buzz, like going to the lunchroom or going to study hall or to the library or whatever it was. But all the kids were talking about the fight and the result. That was one of the only times growing up that I can remember in school there being an excitement from my schoolmates. It was that fight, and it was when Mike Tyson was knocking everybody out when he won the title against Berbick, things like that. It took something really special to get my classmates all jacked up on a fight.
And of course, the Gen Zers now have no idea what a newspaper is, but boxing was so mainstream that it was front page of the newspaper, not just front page of the sports section. And that was a night where they would have held the printing of the front page for wait, we're going to get the result of the fight and put 2 paragraphs in on the front page with a picture. You didn't have the internet, kids. You didn't have instantaneous stuff on your phone to be able to find it out.
There was no phone. It was nailed up to the wall in your kitchen.
That's exactly right, with a rotary dial, probably. So that's the time period that we're talking about, 1985. We're talking about 2 Hall of Famers squaring off. And eventually, it's after the most violent of first rounds, it's Marvin Hagler who's victorious. So better than just you and me reminisce. Shall we bring our 2 guests on?
Let's do it.
Why don't we do that? Al Bernstein, who was on the call that night on the closed circuit on the pay-per-view, if you will. No pay-per-view in the home back in 1985. No box. You had to go to a location to be able to see it. Al Michaels, the legendary voice now of the NFL that you know him as, but he was a star for ABC. He was on the play-by-play call. Al Bernstein's going to explain how he came to be on the closed circuit broadcast and his relationship with Al Michaels. And then you'll hear from Barry Tomkins. He and Ray Leonard and, again, Larry Merchant were on the replay call, the HBO tape-delayed replay later in the week, calling it live, sitting right there calling it live, but their broadcast aired days later on the weekend. Let's hear from both of those guys now on Hagler and Hearns and what they remember. As promised, he was there, Big Dan, 40 years ago, April the 15th, 1985, on the closed circuit broadcast with the Al Michaels. Hello, Al Bernstein. Great to have you back on the Big Fight Weekend podcast. Okay, the first one is, we keep saying this. I don't want to accept that this is 40 years on, but it is 40 years on, Al. It's great to have you, and it's remarkable that here we are talking about this fight 4 decades later.
Yeah, pretty amazing. Luckily for me, I was 10 years old when I did it.
Yeah, and still knocking them dead.
It was a remarkable thing, and it doesn't seem like it could be 40 years, right? It just doesn't. But nonetheless, it was a remarkable time, and it's so burned in our minds, I think, that we all can remember, what we were up to at that time. Obviously, I know what I was doing. I was sitting ringside calling this fight, and every aspect of it, it is a vivid memory to me.
Let's pick it up from the beginning. I've asked you this before, but for the audience here, how did it come about that you would be on the closed circuit broadcast with Al Michaels, with Kurt Gowdy as the host? Explain how
Yeah.
all of that came about.
Well, it was interesting. My part wasn't that complicated because now I was only 5 years into my broadcasting career, and I was doing the Top Rank Boxing Series, which is virtually every week on ESPN. So the Top Rank people who were, of course, coordinating that telecast, I wasn't working for them or anything, but I was working intimately with them because I was doing their series every week. And I had done the 1983 Duran Hagler fight with my then partner, Sal Marciano. So I had done a major pay-per-view for them. And then when this one came up, yeah, I guess it made sense for them to ask me. And they did. And the reason that Al Michaels got on the job, I happen to know, is because at that time, ABC was considering me they were going to go have an analyst for their boxing. They had always done the boxing with a singular voice, Cosell, and then they had other people doing it. Chris Schenkel and some other, Keith Jackson did a little boxing. And they were going to make it a two-person team, and they were considering me. And they were going to have Al Michaels do the boxing. So they wanted to hear us together. So they contacted Top Rank and said, could you put Al Michaels on this pay-per-view? And they were probably happy to do that because Al was, even at that time, his career was burgeoning. And that was how we got paired. And of course, Kurt Gowdy, I don't know the genesis of him coming on the broadcast, but I'd never even met Kurt Gowdy at that point in my life, and grew up watching him, so it was pretty remarkable. I mean, I remember sitting in the production meetings, thinking to myself, "Holy cow, how did I land here?" Watching it was really pretty wild.
Big Dan, go ahead.
All right, Al, I've always wondered this actually, because, and I, TJ, were talking about this before you joined us on the call. There are two broadcasts for this fight, as we know. As you mentioned, you did what became as the international broadcast with Al Michaels.
Well, that was the official pay-per-view.
Right. And international and the pay-per-view, closed circuit, etc. And then there was the HBO broadcast with their broadcast team. And your broadcast, in even though HBO was where I think a lot of people may have seen it a week later on the replay, over the course of time, that broadcast that you and Al Michaels did together, I believe, has been seen way more than the other one because it was on, Super Bouts and ESPN Classic, and that's the one that gets replayed way more often. You can find it more readily on YouTube.
Maybe, yeah.
So my question is this: So you're sitting there doing that fight with Al Michaels, and then there's also what I think is a similarly famous call of the fight by the HBO folks. Have you ever gone back and watched their version to sort of see how they did it? And what are your impressions of the differences? Because they both have very memorable lines from you and Al, and also from their broadcasters.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And of course, Barry Tomkins did the broadcast with Larry and Ray Leonard, right? They Barry and I have talked about it many times. And then, of course, as you know, and everybody knows, I worked with Barry for 8 or 9 years on the Top Rank Boxing Series. There are differences based on a bunch of different things. I mean, I'm going to say something honestly here that I don't know if I've ever said before.
Bring it on.
I didn't really like my call of that fight.
Wow.
Why?
I'm shocked by that because that's such a memorable call.
I didn't love it. I mean, I thought it was okay, but I departed a little bit from my normal style. The excitement of the moment had me a little more excited, and my voice texture and everything. And I wasn't 100%. I thought I did some good things on the broadcast, but it wasn't exactly me. And Al Michaels, interestingly, who had done we had done the undercard all the way leading up to it. he's not a wildly excitable broadcaster. He's got a little bit more of a subdued style, even though he can be excited. Well, he was more subdued during the first 2.5 hours, and then he was very excited during the show. So it wasn't that I think we were did a bad job. It's our broadcast. I think if you listen to it, is I'm going to say a little more up tempo, if you will, than I would have expected it to be. And I think that Barry and Ray and Larry did also. I mean, I thought they did a wonderful job on their broadcast, uh, and and it was just the nature of the beast is that you have all these different people doing it, so of course they're going to approach it differently. And I think the big thing was that was the only time Al Michaels and I ever did boxing together, whereas Barry and that group had done it, all the time. So yeah, there are differences. I'm not saying I hated what I did, but I just, if that's one of those times in life, because it gets replayed over and over and over again, I wish I could jump back in time and do some things differently.
I think, Aldo, the fact that you mentioned that you got so excited, that's what comes across to the fans
Well,
watching that
yeah,
gets us amped up. Because when the broadcasters get excited,
yeah.
but are still calling the action, it gets the rest of the folks watching all juiced up for
Yeah,
it.
and it was organic. I'm not, as you know me very well. I'm not
Sure.
a person that goes into it with taglines or thinking about being excited. It was organic, so I guess the organic feeling of it. And I am glad I said that line at the end of the first round, which was organic and just came out of me. I'm not giving a hyperbole where I said, it's one of the great rounds in middleweight history, which is pretty much an obvious statement, but
Well,
I
the only
felt
thing
like it needed to be said at that
I
point.
was gonna say, the only thing you could criticize that line for is maybe you could have just left out the word middleweight. It wouldn't even have mattered because
That's exactly right. I
you
could have
know.
just said one of the great rounds of boxing history, which it was.
So I have
You
another question about that for you then. Now, I don't know how the logistics of the event work. Did you guys have like a fighter meeting with the guys like in the day or so before the fight? Do you remember?
We did, and I know what you're going to ask. Was it with everybody?
Well, I know that I mean I'd be interested actually if it was,
Okay.
but the reason I'm asking what I want to get at is when you're all or whoever was there, whether it was just you and
Yeah.
Al in your closed circuit team or you're also in the same room
Right.
with the other guys. I wonder is if you had the inkling in that moment in that meeting that this was going to be throw caution to the wind and just come out blasting because Bob Arum has told the story many times about being on the press tour where they had a
Yes.
barnstorm and they were facing each other every day for like a couple of weeks and they just wanted to beat the crap out of each other every moment of the day. And so as soon as that bell rang, all that pent up aggression came out. But you were there as it's
Yeah.
even now on fight week day before 2 days before the fight. Did you think this is what was going to happen?
I attended a couple of those press conferences during that press tour, and many times later, and of course we've all had conversations with Marvin and Tommy afterwards. They attest to the fact that during that, and I was there to see it. And I saw one of the press conferences earlier in the press conference tour, and one later. So it was an interesting flavor as the tour went on. Yes, their annoyance with each other was palpable, obviously. And, they wanted to rip each other's head off. So the idea was, I think most of us felt it would be faster paced at the beginning than maybe other fights they had had. Marvin Hagler was known to be a ring technician early in fights where we might even see him switching from lefty to righty and just, getting his bearings. Tommy Hearns, of course, was a superb boxer as well as a big puncher. So I don't think anyone expected that, but I do think the general consensus among all of us and everybody kind of covering it was this might be a little quicker start than normal. Obviously, that was the
It's a little.
understanding of the decade.
Well, and,
Yeah.
and to your point, Ray Leonard says on his call 30 seconds in with Barry Tompkins, I expected this, Barry.
So
He
that's
really,
right.
he really believed
Yeah.
they were going to go right at it. I want to tee you up and cue you with something you told me before. The great Al Bernstein's hanging here with us on the Big Fight Weekend podcast series here talking about the 40th anniversary of Hagler Hearns. You said you did something that night for the first time that you've now done many times, which as the fighters were coming to the ring, you took your headphones off to soak it in and to enhance you being able to describe what was happening. Pick it up on that point on why you did that, if you
Yeah,
would.
I did. But about half hour before, 40 minutes before, whatever, or no, maybe it was when I think we had a little break when there was a piece running, and Bruce Trampler was right there, and I said to him, I said, does this crowd seem? It was the outdoor stadium at Caesar's Palace, right? So the sound got diffused a little bit into the air, but I said to Bruce, I said, is this crowd more subdued, or it felt almost subdued? And he said, yeah, it feels odd. And I think we both then kind of thought, we kind of came to the consensus that it wasn't that they were subdued. They were so intent on what was about to happen, they were just concentrating. And then when the fighters came out to their walk-ins, the crowd was just, you could feel the electricity. And so during the walk-ins and right at that moment, just before, I guess I was so taken with being there too, which was, I remember thinking consciously to myself, you are the luckiest human on the planet to be sitting in this chair. It just was. And that's when I took my headphones off for a moment, which producers don't like you to do. And I wanted to feel the atmosphere. I said, I want to feel like I don't want to be removed for a moment. And it was extraordinary. And it became a ritual for me over the last 40 years that in almost every fight that I do exactly the same thing.
I'm so glad you just said that, Al, because I have to tell you, I've been covering fights at ringside for 25 years. And
Sure.
one thing I have always done, because like you, I always appreciate the fact that I'm there. And I've done this for small club fights I've been at, all the way to the biggest fights in the world, Mayweather, Pacquiao, Mike Tyson fights, Canelo fights, Oscar fights, whatever, is when they're coming into the ring or when they're doing the anthems or some moment before the fight starts, I've always sort of just taken a
Hmm.
moment, looked around at the crowd, and just sort of like try to put it in my brain so I remember it. I've done that for as long as I've been doing this.
Yeah,
And,
I think it there's something about it that you don't want to feel disconnected from the setting you're in. You don't want it to envelop you, so you can take a step back and still, be doing your job, not be fan-like, but you do want to feel it.
so when the fight's happening, I'm curious because we've talked about the chaos of the first round, how they came out, and as TJ brought up what Ray Leonard said, they're going to come out fast, but he also at one point said, they're going to settle down in the second round
Yeah.
and box more, which
Who
is
knew that didn't happen, right?
maybe compared to the first round, they did a little bit,
Yeah,
but
a little
not
bit.
not,
Yeah.
not in general. But what I was wondering is, and now it's sort of known that when Tommy landed the big right hand on Hagler on that big head of his, that he broke his hand. But you didn't really know that in the second
No.
round and the third round how he was throwing it. So I'm wondering from your vantage point, sitting ringside and watching how this is going, did anybody in the truck, you, Al Michaels, anybody sort of feel like or have an inkling that this hand is broken?
Not really. And you hit on it, Dan. He kept throwing the punch
Yeah.
and kept throwing it well. And so it didn't look like a one-handed fighter. And so we didn't know that was the case. And to buttress that, and I don't want to get ahead of you guys, but it wasn't like Tommy Hearns had a terrible second round either.
Mm-hmm.
People have a misnomer in their brain that, oh, after round one, Hagler owned him. No, no, the CompuBox numbers and everything will show you that in round two, Tommy Hearns was very competitive, still, and part of it was he was still throwing the right hand. So no, we didn't know that.
Yeah, he was using the reach, he was using the jab. I
Yeah,
go back to
and
the
I
opening.
don't think on the other broadcast anybody conjectured
No,
about it. Did they? Okay,
I think he kind of whispered it maybe to Emmanuel Stewart. You didn't pick it
yeah,
up on the mic
couldn't hear it.
on
Yeah,
the microphones that were in the corner. But he clearly was on the bicycle, landing the jab, landing the right
yep.
hand in the second round, and the fight kind of settled in. I want to go back to the very beginning as Dan led in. You're in mid sentence, and Hearns landed that lethal right that put so many people out, and it actually stunned Marvin Hagler from coming in, and you stopped yourself and you
I
said,
did.
"Oh, that hurt Marvin right away." 40 years later, do you still see that moment? Do you still remember that moment? And holy cow, he just stopped
Yeah.
Hagler from coming forward, and it's on now.
Yeah, and I discussed that with Marvin Hagler, and he said to me on a couple of different occasions that's the hardest he's ever been hit. And And let's remember, after that, he had a war with John the Beast Mugabe, and Mugabe was a huge puncher. But he said that was the hardest he'd ever been hit, and he was momentarily stunned, never in danger of going down or anything, but clearly, and think about it, that came seconds into the fight. It wasn't, and the other part about that that's so fascinating. There are 3 or 4 questions about this fight that are fascinating and remain, a topic that you can think about. The first one is that what happens if Tommy Hearns doesn't break his right hand? Is this fight different? I don't know, but that's one of the lingering things that can be left in your mind from it.
Well, I'm sure that you've been asked this before, but I've never asked you this, and all the times we've chatted about different fights. And you've done not only this fight, all those great Showtime fights that you broadcast, Vasquez Marquez fights and Corrales Castillo, and we could go on and on. When you make the Al Bernstein list of your career of the best fights you've ever been ringside to call, where do you put Hagler versus Hearns?
I put it 1A, or 1B, I'm going to say. Number 1 is Castillo Corrales.
I'm so
one.
happy you said that, because for me, it is.
Yeah. Only because, of course, it didn't have quite the magnitude of this fight. But and it's hard, when you get that question, I'm sure all the time, and everybody does. It's hard to quantify because there's so many terrific fights that are exciting and well fought that we've covered and announced over the years. But the Castillo Corrales is number 1 because it's Hagler Hearns times 3. And it had the dramatic ending that turned everything around with the 2 knockdowns of Corrales, the mouthpiece going out, him being in a position where he was never going to win a decision then. And in the very same round, out of nowhere, turns it around and stops Castillo. So between the fact that it was 9 rounds fought, just like the first 2 rounds of Hagler Hearns, and it had that amazing ending, to me, that has to be number 1. But this one is number 2 because of all the magnitude and everything else.
Yeah, because the 9 rounds in Corrales Castillo, it was already an all-time fight. In the 10th round, pretty much sent it over the top, it seemed to me.
Yeah, because it was, and the other thing about it is, with no disrespect to them, like Gotti Ward was fantastic and great, but not fought quite higher merit.
Very good. All right, just another moment or two here with Al Bernstein joining us to talk the 40th anniversary of Hagler Hearns. Here's another one. How many times do you think you've watched at least the first round at this point, 40 years later? Would you put it at 10? My guess would be closer to 50, because my hand is up that it's at least 50 times I've watched.
I think it's more. I'd say more.
Of all of that first round. What say you? You lived it. What say you?
I'm gonna guess I might be in the 50 range, 40 to 50, something like that. And part of that is because sometimes like I just wrote a column for Ring Magazine about it, right? That's in this April issue. So that made me go back and watch it once. And then when you watch it once, it's hard to just watch it once, isn't it? So 2 days later, I'm still writing the story. So I'm going to go back and revisit that one other thing that I wanted to think about. And I watched it 3 times just to do that article. So there's 3 times right there. And then other times when you need to look at it. And then other times when it'll pop up, right? You're watching something else, pops up on the right hand to the screen, and you take a look at it. And so, yeah, it's it's a bunch of times, that's for sure.
And just one more. What should we know that maybe we don't know about the aftermath of that? It's obviously the pinnacle for Marvin Hagler to have won it. What else should we know about that night that maybe we don't know about how great it was? Anything?
Well, okay, here's one that to show what a great fight it was. My friend Gary Shandling, the late Gary Shandling, who was opening for Joan Rivers at Caesar's Palace. Of course, a huge boxing fan who owned his own boxing gym and, he loved the sport. He came to see the fight but had to be back to open for Joan Rivers. And he told me I only had time for a 3 round fight, and that's what we got. He said, so to me, it's the most perfect fight I've ever seen.
That is a great line. And I love
That's
Gary. I love Gary with the
So
Larry Sanders.
Gary Sailing says it's perfect. I guess it's perfect.
3 fight fit in the
But
window, then he could go open up for Joan at the comedy.
TJ, I've been
yeah,
obsessed with
and he
these.
had to get back, so he was praying for a quick fight.
I've been obsessed with this fight and the Four Kings 9 fights for most of my life. That's a new one for me. I never heard
Love
that out. That's
I,
awesome.
I love that.
I mean, it's crazy. Yeah, no, it's wild. So yeah, and I think the to me the aftermath is there's a couple things about the aftermath for me. Okay, one is, and this doesn't get talked about, I don't think, as much as it might. So, and let's think of the current day boxing scene when a fighter suffers a dramatic defeat like that, right? A devastating one. And let's go back there then. Tommy Hearns not only picked himself up off the canvas in a general sense, a literal sense and a general sense. Not only did he get back on the horse, he crafted a phenomenal career after that, didn't he?
Yes.
Knocking people out, winning championships, going up to the light heavyweight division and upsetting Virgil Hill, winning a rematch against Ray Leonard, even though they didn't give him the decision. You know, that moment of abject disappointment and losing didn't even come close to stopping him, right? It didn't it barely paused him. And I think that's really an important thing to take from that. And of course, for Marvin Hagler, he was older than his age was ever reported. So that was, and then he fought several more years. And, of course, he had the great fight with Mugabe and the very close loss to Leonard. And Marvin at that point had already had a long career with those great fights early in Philadelphia and everything. So he was really in the twilight of where he was going to be. But I mean, it was so I think for the aftermath for Hearns is one that we sometimes don't realize when you look back, because when you look at that fight, that was a devastating loss, and at the time. So, it's pretty amazing that he was able to pull himself together and craft that career afterwards.
I don't think anybody would have thought that Hagler would go on as the winner to only fight 2 more times in the next
Yeah,
2 years. And Tommy, even though he had some time off near the end of his career, but ultimately fought 20 more years.
right. That's pretty right. But both of those facts are surprising. Yeah, that's a very good point, Dan.
And Hearns won multiple world titles in
Yeah,
multiple weight divisions moving up
yeah,
after that night.
yeah,
Listen, what a treat to have you here. The phrase I love is forever linked. He is forever linked with Hagler Hearns and that night. Al Bernstein, you're a treat on every occasion, but especially on something like this. Hall of Famer on the air and off the air. Much thanks from Dan and me for hanging talking the 40th anniversary. Dan, was this any good with Al Bernstein? Was this any good,
This
Dan?
is pretty good. Maybe
Yeah.
not as good as the fight itself, but it was pretty good.
yeah. Not as fun. Yeah, the fight itself was pretty darn good. So no, I appreciate it. It was fun to be with you guys. And it's funny. I forgot that this was until about a week ago when I started seeing things pop up. I forgot about this being the 40th anniversary of it. But hey, we're all still here and we're doing stuff with boxing, and so that also is a joy. So yeah, I appreciate you guys having me on. And this last couple of days, I've had a lot of opportunities to think about this and chat about it, and it's fun because it's a good memory. And even if it's funny, we're talking about Tommy Hearns. Even when he talks about this fight, he says it was an honor to be a part of it, even though it didn't go the way he wanted to. It's part of boxing folklore, and you can't ask for more than that.
Love it. Well said, Al Bernstein. Thank you, my friend.
Take care, guys.
Okay, we follow up hearing from legendary analyst Al Bernstein with legendary play-by-play man, Hall of Famer, the Barry Tomkins, who was on the call 40 years ago. Good Lord, April 15th, 1985, for the HBO broadcast with Ray Leonard and Larry Merchant of Hagler Hearns. and Barry Tomkins with us right here as part of the Big Fight Weekend podcast series and our coverage. It is an honor to have you. I'm joking on the video show. He's in purple for royalty, and rightfully so. It's the way that it should be. Thank you. And when I say to you, April 15th, 1985, what immediately comes to mind about what we saw that night and what we've relived countless times since then, Barry?
Well, one of the great fights ever, one of the great fights, certainly that I had the pleasure of calling, but that particular round, and I'm almost certain, as I recall, that I said it somewhere during that first round, was the greatest round of boxing I've ever seen. I can't imagine one more exciting in the history of the game. Dan, you know a lot more about the long history of boxing than I do, but it was really special. And of course, every year on this anniversary, now it's a noteworthy one, being 40 years, but every year I'm reminded about it, and every year it shows up in social media, and you can't get away from it even if you wanted to, but by no means do I want to.
Along those lines, for a while after the fight in the 80s and the 90s, when you were working fights all the time, did you constantly, daily, all the time have people coming up to you to talk to you in particular about the first round, if not the Hagler-Hearns fight? What about it?
Yeah, certainly about that fight, and about the Hagler-Leonard fight also, and the other fight. And I think, Dan, you and I have talked about this in the past. The greatest fight that I ever did personally, just in terms of the caliber of fight, was Arguello and Pryor. So people talk to me about that fight as well. But when it comes to specifics about a certain portion of a certain fight, there's no question that one laps the field.
Big Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, Barry, I mean, you've done so many fights for a variety of different outlets you work for. Obviously, I think you're probably best known for your stint with HBO, but you did fights for a lot of different outlets, Showtime and, plenty of others as well. When you think of all the, I don't know, it's probably, Barry, got to be thousands of fights you've called, I would imagine, in your career.
Probably. Yeah, probably.
I mean, and you mentioned about Arguello and Pryor, and that's a special fight also. But like you said, it doesn't have, I don't think it has the worldwide ultimate recognition by non-boxing fans the way Hagler and Hearns does. But so if you had to identify a singular fight, is it Arguello Pryor? Is it Hagler Hearns? Is it something else that we're not thinking about? Because you called so many tremendous battles through the years.
Well, the one, Dan, that stands out to me was Hagler Leonard. For various reasons, to this day, and I'm sure this happens to you, people will say, who won that fight? Who really won that fight? To this day. And how many years ago was that? Almost 40 years ago.
So I asked, we'll deviate for a quick second off Hagler Hearns. Who won the fight?
Who won Hagler Leonard?
Leonard.
Yes, thank you. I agree.
Good.
We make it unanimous.
Back to the Hagler Hearns, though.
We can talk more about that. I know you want to talk about the other fight here. There's a whole story that goes with that fight that I've probably told before, but if we wanted to get into that, we could talk about it. But
sure,
let's talk about what you guys want to talk about.
No doubt. So when we talked with Al a little while ago about the magnitude of this, one of the things in the buildup is these two guys began to get more and more aggravated with the press tour and with each other. And Ray Leonard says when the fireworks start in the first 30 seconds, I expected this, Barry. He says this to you. Did you have some kind of feeling they're going to go right at each other? Or were you as surprised maybe as the rest of us at how violent it was right away round one?
I wasn't surprised, but I wasn't surprised for a different reason than Ray wasn't surprised. I really honestly didn't give Hearns much of a chance in that fight. And I'm not sure Hearns gave Hearns much of a chance in that fight. And I think he thought very much like Spinks did with Tyson, that I'm going to just put it all out there in the first 3 minutes, hope I can get him out of there. And if I can't, I'm done. I mean, obviously it's not a conscious feeling, but that was really what I felt about Tommy Hearns. I really felt somewhere inside of him, he thought that was the only way he was going to win that fight, was to get Hagler out of there right now.
Barry, when they made the match, and obviously you're doing the blow-by-blow for HBO, and they're going to be broadcasting this fight, and you have a few months before the fight is going to actually happen. I'm curious what your mentality was in terms of your own excitement level for the fight, because when fights get made, you always have a visceral reaction. Oh, I love that fight. I can't wait. Some might be, oh, that's probably okay. But like in terms of Hagler and Hearns, when you found out, okay, we're going to be doing this match, what was your sort of excitement level for the fight, not knowing that was going to be as legendary as it turned out to be?
I thought it was going to be a good fight. I mean, I thought it was going to be a competitive fight. Although, as I said, I really, in my own mind, I really didn't give Hearns much of a chance in that fight, to be really honest with you. And I was frankly, I was a big Marvin Hagler fan, just in terms of how he prepared for fights and how he handled himself. And I had a real fondness for him. He was a guy that I liked outside the ring every bit as much as I did as a professional fighter. I spent some time with him up in Provincetown where he used to train, and I just liked the way he went about his business. I never thought he ever showed up, and I've always said this about the very best fights. You can't be 98%. If you're 98%, you're going to lose at a fight of that level. And I never saw Marvin Hagler be less than 100%. Now, I'm not saying Tommy Hearns ever did, but just in how the two prepared for the fight, not only that fight, all of their fights for that matter, I just saw a big difference in Marvin Hagler.
Barry, was the reason that you said you didn't really give Tommy much of a chance, was it a matter of him having been in the smaller weight divisions and Marvin had been a dominating middleweight champion? Was it because you'd seen Tommy get knocked out, like, for example, by Ray Leonard as a welterweight? What was the reason that you thought that he wouldn't have a chance?
Yeah, the former. I just thought he was coming up to 160, and he didn't have a ton of power. Even as a welterweight, he could get guys out of there for sure. But at 160, I just didn't think he could match power with Hagler. And Hagler, Hagler was not a guy necessarily who's going to get you out of there with one punch. But what I really liked about Hagler is if you had you hurt, you're gone, and great finisher. But it was mainly what you said, what you suggested. It was mainly the fact that he was coming to 160, and I just thought that's a natural weight for Hagler, and I wasn't sure it was a natural weight for Hearns.
So when you see Marvin, in the end, really, I mean, the first round obviously is super competitive, but eventually it becomes a dominating, pretty, violent sort of knockout in the third round. And on that night, when you're calling the fight and you think to yourself, we just saw Marvin Hagler score this incredible knockout against another great fighter in Hearns, even if you didn't think he necessarily had you a chance. What if I told you on that night that the guy that won the fight that knocked out Tommy Hearns in 3 rounds and did what he did was going to fight only 2 more times over the next 2 years and retire, but the guy that got absolutely scorched is going to go on and win multiple of titles in other weight classes, continue to move up in weight, do it at middleweight, do it all the way up to light heavyweight, and literally fight for another 20 years? What would you have said to me?
I would have doubted you, and
he's speechless.
I'm not throwing bouquets here, but I always respected your opinion. You know more about boxing than I do, and I've been around it for a long time. I always respected your opinion, and had you have told me that, I would have said, "Oh yeah, sure, of course." I wouldn't have believed it. More than anything else, I was really surprised at Marvin. Marvin was he was such a sensitive guy. And I think when he lost to Ray, he just lost everything. He lost his persona, and
was it because he lost, or because of the fact that it was the way he lost? It was so close and people argued that he won and he didn't get the call. In other words, if he had been wiped out, that'd be one thing. But to lose on a nail biter like that, is that maybe the difference?
Yeah, I think that could have affected him. Again, I never really sat down and talked to him about it, and I don't know that he would talk about it, frankly. But yeah, I think, his entire being, not just his being as a fighter, but his being as a human being, I think was tied up in that fight, and in his mind, I think he felt he was shamed, and I don't believe he was, and I believe Ray stole the fight, but hey, that's part of the sport, and I think that's how Ray won. I think he stole it, and that's exactly what he told me he was going to do. Well, I'll tell you this brief backstory. I was again, I really didn't want to get so much into that fight because we're talking about the other. But when Duran fought Hagler, I fought Hearns rather. At the end of the fight, I beg your pardon. When he fought Hagler, at the end of the fight, Duran came over and stuck his head between the ropes to where Ray and I were sitting, and said to Ray, "You can beat this guy." And I know that's when Ray said,
I never knew that, Barry. I learned stuff from Al today that I never knew before, and now I'm hearing from you. You're saying to me when the fight ended, even though he lost that close fight to Hagler, Duran said to Ray on the HBO broadcast, "You can beat this guy."
On the broadcast, not on mic. He came over.
No, that's what I mean. Not an interview, but like just privately.
He came over, stuck his head between the ropes, leaned over to Ray, and said, "You can beat this guy."
After he'd already fought Ray twice.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Wow. And so did you see a Ray reaction? Did he say anything to you about that?
I didn't, but the oddity is, it was about, I don't really recall, but maybe 3 or 4 months after that, we were doing a fight. It was a Camacho fight in Florida, and Ray called me up. This is so Ray, Ray called me up and said, "Oh, I rented a boat. We're going to go have lunch up on the inland waterway." And so he said, "Meet me at such and such a dock." So I'm expecting Ray to come up and 20-footer. Of course, he's got the Queen Mary,
right.
And he and I, we were sitting up on the bow of the boat, going up the inland waterway, and Ray just out of the blue said, "You know how to beat Marvin Hagler? Here's how you beat Marvin Hagler." And he said, "You got to fight 3 times a round for 15 seconds every round. And you got to finish the final 15 seconds of the round and look impressive." And it was 2 years later, I think, or a year and a half later. That's how he won the fight.
So
how have we had a million interviews, documentaries, stories, in-depth pieces, and this is the first I ever hear of this. And like I said to TJ a million times, I've been obsessed with these fights for my whole life.
Exactly, because you got to get Barry Tomkins, the king in the purple, to come tell the story about being on the yacht with Ray Leonard.
Yeah, the answer to the question is nobody ever asked.
Well, there you go.
There you go.
It's another thing. So along those lines, we need to recreate for people that Ray had retired for a second time, basically, in and around Hagler Hearns. Mm-hmm. And so that made an interesting backdrop that he's your analyst, along with Larry Merchant, involved in the fight when Marvin so much wanted to fight Sugar Ray Leonard. And Hearns at that time wanted a rematch, obviously, with Sugar Ray Leonard having lost to him. What about that aspect from what you remember, that aspect of Ray still being a big chess piece for both Hagler and Hearns leading to their fight?
Ray was a guy who kind of, he liked to, conquer bridges, and he'd done that already with Tommy Hearns. I think he felt Hearns I already did that. I took care of that business, and I don't need him anymore. He needs me, but I don't need him.
They can make a lot of money together, though.
Well, I could, yeah. But I think Ray always wanted a piece of Hagler. I really do. I think he always wanted that. And, there was a time where they were friends. I remember when Ray opened, he had a seafood restaurant in Baltimore for a short time. And when he opened the restaurant, Marvin came to the opening, and they were, I mean, they weren't, how you doing, Marv kind of friends, but they were friends, and I think Ray I don't remember what happened that night, but Ray didn't really acknowledge that Marvin had gone out of his way, to come to this thing for Ray. And Ray kind of dissed him, and I think that's really what drew that spark of Ray saying, I think I want to take care of this. But it was more than anything else. Believe me, it was Duran.
Interesting. Duran saying you could beat him. Yeah.
Did you ever get a sense, because you guys had done Marvin's fights, you've done Hearns fights before. And I'm not talking about just because there was, that sort of irritation with each other leading up to the fight because they were in front of each other, getting ready to fight each other. But other than that, what was your sense of the relationship that Marvin and Tommy had outside of just that fight taking place?
Marvin and Tommy?
Yeah.
I don't really know that they had a relationship. I mean, maybe they did. If they did, I don't really know about it. They were such different guys.
Much different.
I mean, that's one of the things I really liked and admired. And when I say that about Marvin, how much I liked him, I'm not trying to say anything bad about Tommy Hearns, but Tommy was never a guy. It was all professional with Tommy, whereas with Marvin, I remember going for a run with Marvin in Provincetown on one of his morning, runs. And and at that time, it was in the wintertime, so the town wasn't really alive, like it normally is. But, Provincetown is a very big gay population in Provincetown. There's a fisherman population, Portuguese fishermen there, and everybody in that town loved Marvin. And I remember on that run, we ran down through the main street of town, and people would come out of stores, and there was a hairdresser came in, hi, Marvin, and Marvin would talk, hi, I knew him by name, little old ladies from the market, would come out and say, hi, Marvin. Marvin would always, and he ended the run by going on board one of the fishing boats and having coffee with the Portuguese fishermen, so he cut right through, everybody, he was just a good guy. I would have liked Marvin Hagler if he was, it doesn't matter if he was a fishmonger,
After he won the fight, and even though, maybe he doesn't know it at the time, but he's not going to be around as a professional boxer for much longer.
Right.
He'd been fighting for such a long time. The Hearns fight and that victory and the way it happened, that's what really put him into the mainstream. He started getting the commercial endorsements. He's doing commercials, for, the deodorant. He's doing all kinds of different things. Did you get a feeling at any point when you spoke to him after the fight that he felt like, I made it, even though he'd been champ for a long time and been this great fighter, but now he's crossed over and he's got the admiration and the respect, I think, most importantly, from everybody?
Yeah, and respect was a big thing for him. It really was. That's what he wanted more. He wanted it from Ray. Yeah, I do. I think that fight, obviously, people in boxing knew about Marvin Hagler and how good he was. But I don't think, Joe Sixpack necessarily knew about Marvin Hagler, until that fight.
Now he's going on the Tonight Show when he's making appearances and
right. And because he got cut so badly, and it really looked for all the world like he was not gonna even finish the fight, let alone win the fight, And I think that that affected a lot of people who are not necessarily hardcore boxing fans. All of a sudden he was a personality, and respect. Like I said, I think respect for him was really an important thing. I mean, he was a guy, again, I got to know him so well. He was a guy that, I remember one time he and his then wife, they got a camper and they went on a camping trip for like 4 months. They just drove around the country and were in these little, RV lots, or I don't even know I'm not a camper, so
Right.
I don't really know. But, we're just, middle America goes, and he came back and it was the greatest trip he'd ever made in his life. And at that time, he traveled as a fighter. Greatest trip he ever made in his life, just pressing the flesh with people, going fishing with people, hanging out with, Joe Sixpack, just a guy, and I was really admired that about Marvin. I really did. He wasn't necessarily interested in the limelight. He wasn't necessarily interested. I believe this is true, even in money. Obviously he wanted to make as much as he could, and he understood that sport is short-lived. But it wasn't the thing to him.
Man of the people.
Yeah.
He was absolutely 100% man of the people. And I did his fight in San Remo when he was really embraced by the Italians, and I'm sure that had something to do with his living there afterward, marrying an Italian woman.
All right, let's bring it back to the opening round. And you know where I'm coming. All right, so first of all, Hagler in the first 30 seconds is initiating things, and Hearns pops him with that big right hand. What do you remember some 4 decades later about that moment where he didn't drop him, but he definitely stopped him in his tracks and stunned him? What, if anything, do you remember about that?
That he didn't drop him. That punch, I think, probably would have dropped most guys, even at 160 pounds. But Marvin had a beard, Marvin didn't get cuffed around very much, and that's what I remember more than anything else. And he, the great fighters are able to do that. Again, talking about Ray, because I know him so well, in his fight with Marvin, this is another thing. Dana, you probably heard this story, but Ray told me, I don't remember what round it was. I want to say it was like in the fifth round that Marvin popped him and hurt him, and Ray said that it was subconscious, but instead of taking a backward step, he took a forward step and threw another punch. It wasn't a big punch, but Marvin never knew he hurt him. And I think that's kind of analogous to what you're talking about, to when Hearns hit Hagler. Hagler, I don't remember him taking a backward step, even though he just clocked it.
Yep.
And it probably didn't help, by the way, that that it appeared as though we found out later that Tommy had broken the hand, and
in the first round,
he continued to use it, but it wasn't as effective.
Right.
I think did you get the sense that maybe you didn't know that the hand was broken, but after he took the right hand and Marvin really didn't budge, that in Tommy's mind is like, oh shoot, I mean, if I can't get him out of there with my best right hand, I'm in for either a long night or a short night.
Yeah, I think, like I said, I think the whole thing, Tommy Hearns was going to go out on a shield.
Yep.
And I think he did it in the first 3 minutes. I mean, I remember having a conversation. I don't remember if I was on Talkback with the truck or if I was talking to Ray. I don't remember who I was talking to, but saying it's over after the first 3 minutes. I'm sorry, my dog is.
It's okay. That's allowed. Can make an appearance. There we go. But you believed it was done. You believed Hagler had him after 3 minutes, and you were saying that to the HBO people in the truck, is what you're saying.
After the first round, I did. So did Ray. We thought, yeah, I did.
All right. So to go back to the middle of that first round, and you know where I'm coming. You finally spoke for all of us, where it's like it occurred to you, I need to say, this is still the first round, and it resonates 40 years later. Again, I think that, if you had to sum up Hagler Hearns, that phrase sums it up. The way that they beat on each other, a minute and a half, 2 minutes into the first round, they're still waylaying on each other.
Right.
Did you take a pause at the end of that first round and go, wow, what did I just witness for a half second?
Absolutely. Because, when the bell sounds, my eyelid, because Larry was like the analyst and he would talk between rounds. So as soon as the bell sounded, I didn't have to say anything, but I'm glad I didn't have to say anything, because it was one of those kind of rounds, you don't have a lot of that, there's not a lot of, and again, any broadcaster will tell you this, those are things you can't plan, you can't, I've never once said, and I'm sure if you talk to Lamps or talk to anybody who's done this for any period of time, it's just spontaneous. It's just what you're feeling at the time. And, sometimes you get them right and sometimes you don't.
But you had so many great calls in all the fights you've done. I mean, I could sit here and cite them chapter and verse. One's from yourself, one's from other great broadcasters also. When you think of the things that you did call, to me, there's a few famous Barry Tomkins calls. That to me is the number one of all of them. And you had obviously, how do you like it with Marvin against Ray Leonard, and there's others. What's the number one on your own list? Because you're the guy that said it.
It's funny. I walk out of a booth or away from a table, and it's history for me. And I really mean it. And I think one of the reasons is I didn't only do boxing.
Right.
I always did football. I always did basketball. I was a tennis guy for a while. I did, I did the Tour de France. I did track and field, and so, and inevitably, within a week of whatever I happen to be doing for HBO, I'd have something else, And so I never could take, I couldn't take the Hearns Hagler fight with me into a basketball game, the next.
But does anybody come up to you 40 years later and give you a line from one of your basketball games?
That's a good question.
No.
I mean, and by the way, not to say that you didn't call the basketball game.
No, not that I could recall.
But in your mind, I appreciate this as a broadcaster. I appreciate this. In your mind, you have to go on to the next thing, and then the next thing, and then the next thing. I understand what you're saying.
Right. I mean, and I don't. I mean, I remember that saying one of the greatest rounds because it was something I really felt. But the one that you mentioned in the Leonard Hagler fight.
How do you like it?
How do you like it?
Somebody had to remind me. I don't remember ever saying that.
Wow, that's amazing.
So I don't. And somebody reminded me that.
All right. So along these same lines, you did the delayed broadcast. Did you say to everybody, and even for yourself, we have got to watch this together? Do you remember who you watched it with for the first showing, where you watched it, where I
I
got to
don't.
see this
I
back
didn't
just
even
to
realize it
relive
was the replay. I thought it was live.
it? That's all right.
In fact, Al and I have talked about that. I don't remember if he did the live show or I did the live
Right.
show.
It's been a
Just
while.
so you know, you were doing HBO, which was going to be replayed 1 week later, but Al Bernstein and Al Michaels were doing the
They
live
did.
closed circuit
Yeah.
that most people saw
closed
live.
circuit. That's right.
Yeah, yeah.
Because we used to do shows where ABC had the replay and we had
Mhm.
the live show. You
Yep.
know.
All right. So
Yeah.
how many times would you guess, you have to have seen it a few, how many times would you say that you've rewatched Hagler Hearns, if not just the first round? Again,
Well, yeah,
Dan and I
probably have.
confess it's dozens for us, but what about for you?
Yeah, no, I almost have to watch it every year, because it's all over social media. I watched it a few times after it happened, but honestly, I've never been one of those, boy, that was great, I want to watch that again, of my own stuff,
I understand.
But
But
you can watch the other version of it.
yeah, you can
What's
also
that?
watch the other
You can
version.
watch the closed circuit version.
Yes.
Yeah,
Alan,
that's
Alan
right.
out.
That's right.
But with the magnitude of that first round, I mean, I'm still amazed every time I watch it. Forget about the call, just the violence of those two guys. Does it still amaze you that you
Yeah.
were part of that, and how?
Yeah, and the volume.
Neither guy went down with the 150 or 200 punches that were landed. It seemed like
Yeah,
in that round.
yeah.
No, neither guy went down, Barry.
There was the volume as much as anything else, I think. And I don't remember a lot of jabs, I mean, it was all power punches, Yeah, no, when I said it, and it's still true, greatest round of boxing I've ever seen. Not only I've ever called, but I've ever seen. But we also knew that can't go on. One of these guys is going to drop, at one point or another. And we really did feel that Hearns had really shot himself in the first round. I just didn't believe he had anything left. I really didn't. But the other thing that I thought about, it's funny, I was just thinking about it today, and I had thought about it before, is that cut was really a nasty cut. And I really wonder, Dan, if that fight were held now, would they have stopped that fight between rounds, maybe?
I actually, because of the magnitude and who the guys were, I would say, especially in Vegas, knowing that they know their stuff, I actually would say probably not. They would have let it go a little longer to see if it got worse.
If you remember, were you concerned when Steele called time, Richard Steele, the referee, and took him over to the doctor? They may say that cut is too bad. Do you even remember?
Yes. It was a nasty cut. I don't remember how it looked on television, but it was. You were there, I'm sure.
Well, that probably gave Marvin a lot more urgency to do what he did the rest of the round.
For sure. Yeah, I'm sure he was thinking this is going to get stopped at some point, And
he's going to feel like if that happens, I'm thinking about this knowing his career. He's like, I got screwed in England when I fought Minter, or not Minter, when I fought Antifuermo, got a draw. When I finally won the title against Minter in England, I got screwed because I didn't get to celebrate because they went crazy and started throwing stuff in the ring. And I'll be damned if I'm going to let them screw me on this big fight with a cut like that. So I'm going to go out there and get this dude out of here.
Yeah, I'm sure that was in Marvin. Marvin was just such a pro, though, and as I said, he was one of the best finishers I can remember.
Yep.
Ray was a really great finisher also. If you're hurt, it's over.
Yeah.
And I kind of think Marvin, that's kind of the way he went about things. He I don't know that he has a process that he's thinking, boy, if I don't get this guy out of here, they're going to stop this fight. Maybe in retrospect, sorry about this. Guy.
Okay.
Right. We're animal lovers.
Oh, good. She's been sleeping all day. Now
she wants to be part of the show.
Yeah.
Part of it. But Marvin definitely had the urgency. All right. So one more before we get you out of here. Same question we asked with Al. What do we not know? You gave us a lot of what we don't know, but what do we not know about Hagler Hearns that maybe we should know? Like later that night when you took the headsets off, anything that else that comes to mind that maybe we should know about that the public maybe at large doesn't know about that famous night in 1985? Anything?
Oh, only that I always thought of Marvin Hagler, as I said, as the consummate professional, and I'm sure that he felt like he had to be on the gas. He couldn't if he was going to go out, he was going to go out on a shield, just like Hearns, you know. And I felt that, I'm sure he felt there was a sense of urgency. I don't know that I never saw him as really this calculating kind of guy like Ray was. I don't know. I'm not sure Marvin was, you know, but I'm sure he felt a sense of urgency. I'm sure he felt, you know, I need to do this sooner rather than later. And you know, he wasn't gonna just pace himself. He was gonna do everything he could do to get the guy out of there as quickly as he could get the guy out of there. But I think that's more just instinctual than anything else.
Well, I have one more for you, and I ponder this myself because I am, as I've said, I'm very obsessed not only with this fight but with all of the Four King fights. 40 years later, a lot of people obsess still about a fight that lasted 8 minutes and 52 seconds 40 years ago. Why?
Yeah, that's the boxing fan, I think. You know,
It's not normal.
Yeah, except that I think people, you know, I think people remember the moment, you know, rather than the event, you know. Like that's one of the reasons that I always say Hagler Leonard was, for me, was the biggest fight I ever did because it was the lead up to it.
Yep.
And I remember when the fighters were first seen, remember they before they started the ring walk, there was the crowd, the way the crowd went up, it was palpable. You know, I mean, you could feel it. And that was before a punch was ever thrown.
I agree with you that was a bigger fight from the magnitude of the event than the Hearns and Hagler fight. It's just that the Hearns and Hagler
But
fight
isn't it fair
so
that
ultra violent for
isn't
like,
it
the way
fair
went.
that part of that buildup is because Hagler had destroyed Hearns, and now everybody, can he do it to Ray Leonard?
Oh, of
Leonard
course.
coming out of it added to it the destruction of Hearns 2 years earlier, obviously.
Of course. Yeah, I don't know. I just think boxing fans have a tendency to remember the moment rather than the fight.
Sure. Listen, we remember so much about this. You have been great with us. Thank you. You look fantastic. Rayfield and I were excited when you got back to me that, hey, we are going to get a chance to talk to Barry Tomkins about April 15th, 1985. You were there. Again, forever and always, we love. This is still the first round.
Yeah.
In the middle of that round. It's beautiful.
Yeah, that was heartfelt, believe me. I mean, that was, you know, in a career, you have, if you're lucky, you have 5 or 6 things like that, you know, 5 or 6 moments like that. And for me, that was, you know, certainly one of them, you know, and yeah, you know, and you go to bed that night, you think, I hope I said the right thing at the right time, you know. And
you did.
That's all you can
If
do.
we're still talking about it 40 years later, Barry, I guarantee
you did. You did.
For me, if I'm still talking 40 years later,
there it is. You are.
I'm going to watch it when we're done. When we get done with this, I'm going to go watch it.
We're both
it's funny. I just showed it to my son just today, knowing I was going to talk with you guys.
And it holds up. Listen, my friend, thank you. This was our honor to have you here. Sincerely, we mean that.
It was an absolute pleasure anytime. And Dan, great to see you. Great to talk with you.
Yes, Barry, a pleasure as always.
Thank you, Barry Tompkins.
Pleasure.
Wow. And I want to say a personal public thank you to both Al Bernstein and Barry Tompkins, who did not hesitate, Dan Rayfield, not even for a nanosecond. When I contacted both of them, I got an answer from both of them literally within 30 minutes. In Barry Tompkins' case, I got an answer back in like 10 minutes on yes, absolutely. When can we do something about Rayfield? Something about, I want to do this for Dan.
Listen, these are Barry Tompkins and Al Bernstein. They're just great people. They're wonderful
genuine guys.
I've had the great privilege to know both of them for many, many, many years. My entire boxing writing career, 25 years. I've probably known Al a bit better because I've been around him a lot more because Barry wasn't doing many of the big fights. But Barry is as nice and as a good dude to hang with and talk shop with as anybody. Al Bernstein, the same thing. So it was a real thrill to not only get them on the show, but to talk about such a topic that I love so much.
So did we know about the Gary Shandling thing, the comedian with Joan Rivers and the fighting?
Amazing.
I mean, we love that, as we said with Al. And then how about Barry Tompkins went and jogged literally with Marvin Hagler through Provincetown, Massachusetts, and then he shared the story, and you were blown away. You're still blown away.
Yes.
Because you had not heard this before about Duran and what he said to Ray Leonard.
Like I said, I have seen documentaries. I've studied these fights. I've talked to people involved. I've watched and read and been doing so for, most my adult life and even as a teenager. So to hear a nugget like that it was Duran after he loses a close, very tough 15-rounder against Marvin Hagler, to go between the ropes to say to Ray, his great rival, who he already fought twice, who's doing the show for HBO, and to tell Ray Leonard, you can beat Hagler. And that's what maybe it got the wheels turning more than they already were. I know the fight didn't happen right away. It was still about another, a couple of years later.
Right.
But Ray wasn't like super active anyway. He was in retirement. That to me was that's a mind-boggling nugget. So I'm glad that they shared it with us on the show.
How about that? Again, thank you to both of those guys for sharing all of this. All right, so we've been here a little while. What do we say in closing 40 years later about, again, Al Michaels' line, because we didn't share it, is, how much longer can this go at this pace? Not very long at this pace, Al says. Barry Tomkins, this is still the first round with them waylaying on each other. What else do we want to say about the legend of Hagler Hearns 40 years on?
It's just a mythical fight. I mean, it's rare in sports, in life, that you have an event that not only meets the moment and lives up to the hype, but exceeds it. I think even though Hagler and Hearns only lasted for less than 3 full rounds, I think it definitely exceeded it. And you have larger than life characters for different reasons. Part of a great foursome, along also with Duran and Leonard. They defined the 1980s, which was a glorious time for boxing. It's a time in boxing where, for at least a good portion of the decade, was not dominated by the heavyweights. It was dominated by these guys because it was post Ali.
That's
and
right.
It wasn't. Now, Mike Tyson was making his way up and obviously became a legend, in the latter part of the 1980s. He won the title in 1986, but from 1980 until 1986, while there was obviously lots of great fighters in boxing, like there always is in every era, those four, they sort of made each other for a lot of different reasons. So even when Tyson was doing his thing in the latter part of the 1980s, 86 to 89, these guys were still the front pages. They were well-known characters. They were known to the public besides boxing fans. You could walk down the street, and I don't care if you're not a boxing fan, you would still know who Sugar Ray Leonard was. He was of the four kings, he was the guy that made, to use the baseball parlance of, he was the straw that stirred the drink. Like the other three guys were great in their own right, but Ray was the one that made it revolve around him, which is why if you look at the 9 fights, he fought more of them than the other guys did. But the other guys thrived in the fights that did not include Ray. And Hagler Hearns, let's say, of the non-Ray Leonard involved bouts of the great matches between them, clearly the biggest, best, most famous in terms of the action. I know some people will say, of ones that involved Ray, he had bigger ones with Hearns and with Marvin and obviously Duran. But look, like I said, it's a mythical fight, and it will never not be a mythical fight at this stage of 40 years later.
Greatest first round ever. And that has stood up 40 years later.
Indeed.
And still amazing that neither guy went down from all of that violence, each of them landing like 70, 80 punches or more in that opening round. Crazy. Listen, I've had a blast reminiscing. Was this any good? We kind of put this together over the course of a couple of days.
This was fun.
Oh, my Lord. Thank you again publicly, Al Bernstein. Thank you, Barry Tomkins. Amazing stuff with the late marvelous Marvin Hagler and his knockout of Thomas Hearns 40 years later. We remind you that however you found us on this pod feed, we're here previewing going into the weekend, Thursday night into Friday, recap coming off the weekend, Sunday and a Monday, and then special occasions like this. You need to be following and subscribing on the podcast feed.
And by the way, if you're watching us on the YouTube channel, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Try to fill up with more content.
Same thing, because we put this up as a video here as well on the YouTube channel with these great guests that we have. I mean, how about 2 Hall of Fame broadcasting legends being here with us as well? Love it. All right, my friend, we go about the business of present day boxing, but it's always great to reminisce. And man, you know what we're both doing after we say goodbye on this? We're going to go watch. We're going to go watch Hagler Hearns. This is still the first round again coming up. Thank you, Dan Rayfield. Great stuff as always.
You bet.
I am merely TJ Reeves. If you're only hearing us, again, come find the YouTube page. Come find the video as well of this edition, the Big Fight Weekend YouTube page. Follow, subscribe to the Big Fight Weekend podcast feed. For now, we're good on the anniversary of Hagler Hearns here on this special edition on the Fight Freak Tonight podcast.